Hey guys, tonight we drift into the heat and pulse of Lagos, where the air carries a mix of exhaust fumes, roasted plantain, and the faint salt of the Atlantic. Picture the streets before the storm, minibus conductors shouting over one another, traders balancing trays of oranges on their heads, and a restless hum beneath it all. Somewhere in that living tide moves a young man whose face doesn't yet carry the weight of the name he'll one day wear. Chidi Iwuchukwu. Right now, he's just another set of eyes scanning the corners, watching the quiet exchanges that make the city breathe in ways the law will never chart. You probably won't survive this world unless you understand its rhythm, and the rhythm here has its own rules. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to hear from you. Drop your location and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The streets of Lagos are loud, but full of coded silences. Market women trade gossip between haggles. Boys loiter at corner kiosks pretending to sell recharge cards, and eyes meet in ways that mean more than words. Chidi's world at this point is a patchwork of small hustles, delivering sealed envelopes for men whose names aren't said out loud, lingering at football viewing centers where bets change hands under the screen's flicker, and learning that every yes in Lagos is really just a maybe wrapped in politeness. It's the early 2000s, and Lagos is stretching upward with new billboards, new towers, and new tensions. Internet cafes hum with the dial-up hiss of connection. Mobile phones are still status symbols rather than necessities. The streets smell of petrol and ambition, of suya grilled over open flame, of rain steaming off hot asphalt. People move fast because the city demands it. Hesitation here can mean losing your spot in line, your fare, or your life. Chidi grows up in Surulere, where the alleys are narrow and the walls are close enough for you to lean against and feel your neighbor's footsteps through the concrete. His home is modest, 2 rooms and a veranda where his mother dries pepper in the sun. His father, once a mechanic, now works odd jobs at a nearby warehouse, coming home with the smell of diesel in his shirt. Dinner is often eaten in shifts, depending on who gets home first and who has to guard the front while others eat. Even as a teenager, Chidi is the kind who listens more than he speaks. He learns that people reveal themselves in pauses, in the way their voice tightens before they name a price, in the way they glance over their shoulder before handing you a folded note. Lagos rewards those who can read these small signs. His friends call him Old Man because he never rushes, never boasts, and always seems to be weighing something invisible in his mind. The first real money he ever makes doesn't come from crime. Not exactly. It comes from solving small problems. One day, a shopkeeper needs a package delivered to a cousin in Ikeja, but doesn't trust the postal service. Chidi volunteers. He makes the trip without losing the package or the change for the bus fare, and when he returns, he's given a little extra for his trouble. From there, errands multiply. At first, it's groceries, documents, and messages. Later, it's things that aren't mentioned aloud. By 17, he's moving through 3 worlds at once. In the daylight, he helps at his uncle's electronics stall, selling imported radios and used DVD players. In the evenings, he plays football on dusty lots lit by a single dangling bulb. And in the shadows between those worlds, he ferries information, sometimes written, sometimes just memorized. The jobs pay enough to keep him in fresh shirts and keep his family from asking too many questions. Lagos itself is his education. The city teaches him that truth is flexible, that a handshake can be more binding than a contract, and that the loudest threats often come from people with the least power. He begins to notice the patterns, the same black SUVs idling outside certain bars, the same groups of men gathering at the same spots every Thursday night, the same names whispered like both a warning and a password. One of those names is the Black Axe. Officially, they don't exist. Just a rumor of a campus confraternity that somehow grew beyond the universities into the arteries of the city. But Chidi hears the name more and more, attached to stories of disputes settled quietly, debts collected without courtrooms, and opportunities opened for those who belong. He never asks outright, but he listens. In Lagos, listening is the first way in. His introduction to that world is almost accidental. One night, after closing up his uncle's stall, he's walking home when he sees two men arguing outside a shuttered shop. One of them is a customer from the stall. The other, a face he's never seen, but instantly recognizes as someone important. Their words are heated but low, like coals under a lid. As Chidi passes, the customer calls his name. "Chidi, come here. Tell him what I told you. It's a small thing." He repeats the details of a transaction, making it clear the customer kept his side of the deal. The man he's never met watches him for a long moment, then nods once and leaves. The next day, someone leaves a brown envelope under the stall's counter. Inside is cash, more than Chidi's monthly earnings. He doesn't spend it recklessly. He buys his mother new cooking pots, his father new work boots, and saves the rest. That's another thing Lagos teaches you. Flash invites envy. Envy invites trouble. He keeps his head down and his ears open. Weeks pass before he sees the man again. This time, it's at a bar with no sign, just a green door down a side street. Chidi's been sent to deliver a wrapped parcel, and when he steps inside, the air is heavy with cigarette smoke and quiet laughter. The man is there, seated at a table in the corner, surrounded by three others. He gestures Chidi over, asks about his family, his work, his ambitions. Chidi answers carefully, honestly, but never in full. The man smiles like someone recognizing a younger version of himself. That night, walking home under the dim streetlights, Chidi feels the current again. It's stronger now, pulling him toward deeper waters. He doesn't know the titles or the codes yet, but he knows this. Lagos is a city where fortunes change in whispers, and he's just been invited into the kind of conversation that makes those changes happen. Lagos is never truly quiet, not even in the hours when most of the city sleeps. There's always a taxi driver easing his car down an empty road, a security guard whistling to himself behind a gate, a distant hum from a generator that never rests. In that sleepless hum, Chidi's role begins to take a sharper shape. He is no longer just a runner. He has become someone who can be trusted with things that aren't meant to be said twice. The first whispers reach him in the form of errands disguised as favors. A man at the bar, the same man who once watched him with that long, measuring stare, asks Chidi to walk with him after midnight. They cut through alleys Chidi knows by scent and sound, past metal gates and unlit doorways, until they reach a courtyard where two other men wait. There's no introduction, no small talk. A folded piece of paper changes hands. Chidi is told to hold it until morning, then pass it to someone in Surulere. He doesn't open it, not because he's afraid of what it says, but because he understands the deeper currency here, being someone who can be trusted without proof. The next day, when he delivers the paper, The man receiving it doesn't even read it. He burns it in a tin can before handing Chidi a small stack of naira. Trust in Lagos isn't built with grand gestures. It's built in increments. A word kept, a detail remembered, a temptation resisted. Chidi is learning that lesson faster than most, and the people around him are beginning to notice. The bar becomes his unofficial office. He rarely drinks. Beer dulls the edges, and he needs those edges sharp. But he learns to occupy space without drawing attention. The men at the corner table talk business in tones low enough to blend with the music. Sometimes Chidi is asked to carry a message across the city. Other times, he is simply told to sit nearby, to watch who comes in and who leaves. His manner earns him more invitations. One evening, he's summoned to a meeting in a compound on Victoria Island, the kind with high walls and a gate that slides open only after a pause, long enough to test your patience. Inside, the air smells faintly of imported cigars and polished wood. Men are gathered in a dimly lit room, speaking in turns while one man sits silent at the head of the table. Chidi doesn't say a word. He just stands near the back, hands clasped, eyes moving without haste. Later, he's told that the silent man is an elder figure in the black axe structure, someone whose approval can open doors far beyond Lagos. The fact that Chidi was even allowed into the room says more than any handshake could. Outside, the city keeps moving. Danfo buses rattle past street hawkers selling ground nuts, and the lagoon reflects the bright scatter of neon signs. But Chidi's world is shifting. He's beginning to understand the lines between ordinary Lagos hustle and the deeper, older network that the Black Axe maintains. The whispers he carries are more than instructions. They are threads in a larger web. Some concern disputes over territory. Others are about shipments arriving at the port. Occasionally, he hears talk of university initiations or of brothers abroad sending back both money and problems. He files it all away, never repeating it unless asked. One night, walking home under the glow of a flickering streetlight, Chidi sees a figure leaning against a wall ahead. It's the man from the compound meeting, the elder. He steps forward, placing a hand briefly on Chidi's shoulder. "You listen well," he says, his voice low but steady. "That's why you'll last." Then he's gone, swallowed by the night. It isn't a formal initiation, not yet. But in Lagos, sometimes the most binding commitments are the ones that aren't spoken. Chidi feels the weight of it as he turns toward home, the city's restless hum following him all the way. The gate is tall and rust-colored, its iron bars thick enough to stop a charging car. Chidi stands before it in the damp Lagos evening, the scent of rain still clinging to the air. This is not a place you walk into uninvited, not in a city where walls are as much about status as they are about safety. Behind the gate, somewhere beyond the trimmed hedges and the low murmur of voices, a meeting is already underway. When it opens, it does so with a deliberate slowness, the way a host might size up a guest before deciding if they're worth the welcome. A guard in a pressed khaki uniform nods him through, offering no smile. Inside, the compound feels removed from the city. Paved walkways, well-lit verandas, the occasional glint of glass from a window half covered by curtains. The air here smells faintly of hibiscus and diesel from the standby generator Chidi has been summoned to sit in, though no one has explained why. He understands enough to know this is not the kind of gathering where you ask questions. The men seated around the long wooden table are older, their shirts crisp, their shoes polished to a quiet shine. On the wall hangs a large map of Lagos State, the kind government offices keep, though this one is marked with tiny pins and strips of tape that clearly don't follow municipal boundaries. At the head of the table is a man called Oba, though it's not his real name. In this world, titles are as fluid as the stories behind them. Oba doesn't speak often. When he does, the room stills. His presence is the reason Chidi's pulse is steady rather than quick. He knows enough to recognize real authority when he sees it. The topic tonight is business at the port. A shipment has arrived 2 days early, and that means schedules have been thrown off. Some of the men argue for delaying pickup until the usual time. Others insist the goods must be moved immediately to avoid unwanted eyes. Chidi sits quietly at the far end, taking in every word, every small shift in tone. The man who brought him here leans over and whispers, "Watch their hands, not their mouths." Chidi does. He sees the man at the left tapping his fingers each time the word police is mentioned. The man across from him tugging at his cufflink when talk turns to payments. Body language in this room is louder than speech. When the meeting ends, no vote is taken. Instead, Oba simply rises, buttons his jacket, and says, "We move at dawn." It's a decision that sounds casual, but carries the weight of finality. The others nod, some making calls before even leaving the compound. Outside, Chidi is handed a sealed envelope. The instructions are clear. Deliver it to an address near a papa, wait for a reply, and return with it before midnight. He doesn't ask what's inside. He's learned that the less you know, the fewer ways there are for someone to pry it out of you. The drive to a papa takes him along roads slick with rain. Traffic is thinner at this hour, but Lagos never empties completely. He passes trailers parked haphazardly along the roadside, their drivers asleep in the cabs, and hears the low drone of ships in the harbor. At the address, a man in a loose white caftan accepts the envelope without a word and disappears into the building. 10 minutes later, he returns with a smaller envelope, heavier than paper alone would account for. By the time Chidi gets back to the compound, the main gates are closed. The guard lets him in after a quick inspection of the package. He delivers it directly to the man who sent him, who doesn't bother to open it, just places it in a desk drawer and locks it. "Good," the man says. "You're learning, that's all." No handshake, no explanation. But in the unspoken language of this place, it's praise enough. As he leaves, Chidi takes a last look at the iron gate closing behind him. Lagos has many doors, but some, like this one, only open if the right people decide you've earned the right to pass through. The nights in Lagos hold their own kind of pressure. Thick, humid, and threaded with the distant thump of music from clubs tucked deep inside side streets. Chidi walks through it with the ease of someone who has learned that moving too quickly attracts attention, but moving too slowly invites questions. Tonight, his destination is not the iron-gated compound, nor the small bars where messages pass under the cover of laughter. Tonight, he is being tested in a different way. The man who summons him is not one of the elders, but a mid-tier operator called Femi, known for having one foot in the street and one in the meeting rooms. Femi greets him with a grin that doesn't reach his eyes. "You listen better than you speak," he says, "and that's why you'll be useful." They walk together through a cluster of dimly lit shops until they reach a lounge with tinted glass doors. Inside, the air conditioning hums over the low jazz spilling from unseen speakers. The lounge is half empty. 3 men at the bar, 2 in a booth. But it's not the number of people that matters. It's who they are. Femi leads Chidi to a table where a single man sits, his back to the wall. His suit is dark and pressed, his wrist heavy with a gold watch. His smile is slow, deliberate. "This the boy?" he asks, his voice low but clear. Femi nods. What follows is less a conversation and more a measure of presence. The man asks Chidi about his work, his family, his ambitions. Chidi answers honestly, but never gives the whole of anything. Something in him knows that leaving space in his answers lets the other man imagine what might fill it. He doesn't brag, doesn't overplay his hand. Midway through, the man laughs quietly. "You don't talk much. That's good. Words are like bullets. You only get so many before people learn how to dodge them." From that moment, Chidi feels the shift. He is no longer just an errand runner. He is someone they see as capable of speaking for them when the need arises. Over the following weeks, the assignments change. Instead of only carrying messages, he now sits in on discussions, silent most of the time, but there, watching the interplay between men whose decisions ripple far beyond the walls they're made in. These meetings are not always in comfortable lounges. Sometimes they happen in cramped back rooms of mechanic shops. Sometimes in warehouses where the air is thick with the smell of oil and rust. Always, the setting is chosen to match the purpose. If the goal is to settle a dispute, the room is neutral ground. If the goal is to intimidate, the surroundings speak of quiet power. The first time Chidi speaks on behalf of someone else, it's in a disagreement about money owed. Two men are at an impasse, each convinced the other is lying. Femi, seated beside him, leans over and murmurs, "Your turn." Chidi's voice is steady. He lays out the facts as he knows them, neither accusing nor defending too strongly. He makes room for the other man to save face while still agreeing to settle. By the time they shake hands, both sides feel they've won. That's the art of it. Word gets around quickly. Within days, Chidi is approached by others, some from within the Black Axe's reach, some from just outside it, asking him to help smooth things out. He doesn't accept every request. Part of his growing influence comes from knowing when to say no. Through all of this, the city continues its rhythm. Lagos Island glitters at night, Victoria Island hums with new money, and in Surulere, the old alleys still echo with the same shouts and laughter. Chidi moves between these worlds without fanfare, his footsteps quiet but his presence increasingly hard to ignore. And though he never says it aloud, he knows something fundamental has shifted. He's not just in the room anymore. He's part of the conversation. Gold has a way of catching the eye in Lagos. Not the muted glow of a modest wedding band, but the unapologetic gleam of a heavy watch flashing in the neon light, or a chain thick enough to weigh down the neck it hangs from. In certain circles, those glints are as much a language as the handshake or the nod. By the time Chidi begins to see them regularly on his own wrist, he understands exactly what they say. You've moved up, and people are watching. Wealth in his new world doesn't arrive all at once. It trickles in like the first drops of a rainstorm, then gathers speed until the streets are running. First, a bonus for a job well handled. Then, an envelope after a quiet word passed between two men who didn't want to meet in public. Soon enough, it's the little luxuries. Leather shoes bought without haggling, a phone that doesn't freeze when you need it most, a watch that feels like a statement every time he checks it. But the gold isn't just a decoration. It's a signal, one that says you belong to something larger, something that has reach. The Black Axe isn't in the business of making their Consigliere in training look poor. Still, Chidi knows better than to flaunt it. The men who last in this game are the ones who can look like nothing on one street and everything on the next. Money also changes the air in the rooms where he now sits. The arguments are no longer about petty debts. They're about slices of import deals, percentages from nightclub earnings, and who controls the more lucrative bus routes in certain neighborhoods. These are quiet wars, fought with paper, pen, and the occasional veiled threat. Chidi's role in them is precise. He listens, weighs each side, and finds ways to make the other man feel he's walking away with more than he came for. Sometimes that means suggesting a smaller cut now in exchange for a favor later. Other times, it means reframing a loss so it looks like a tactical retreat. One such dispute plays out in a smoky lounge on the mainland. Two senior figures are circling each other verbally over the division of revenue from a series of security contracts. It's clear neither will budge. Chidi leans forward, his tone calm but measured, and outlines a proposal that shifts a percentage point here, moves a deadline there, and, crucially, offers each man a public gesture of victory. They agree. Femi, seated beside him, doesn't hide the smirk. "You're worth twice the trouble you cause," he mutters. Still, the more disputes he settles, the more he realizes that every solution plants the seeds of the next conflict. Quiet wars never end. They just pause until the next provocation. And in Lagos, provocation is always around the corner. Outside, the city glitters in the night. Traffic streams past in a ribbon of headlights, the air thick with the smell of grilled fish and petrol. Somewhere out there, a younger version of himself might still be running errands for small shopkeepers. Chidi glances at the watch on his wrist, the gold catching the light once more, and knows that boy is gone. Lagos after dark is a different city entirely. The heat of the day softens, but the air still holds the faint scent of smoke and salt, and the streets become a stage where shadows move with purpose. It is in these hours that Chidi finds himself most often in the company of men who speak in half sentences, their eyes scanning the room even when the door is locked. Tonight, the meeting is set in a lounge high above the mainland, where tinted windows look out over a glittering stretch of city lights. From up here, Lagos feels almost calm. Traffic reduced to quiet streams of red and white, the ocean a black sheet in the distance. But inside, the air is thick with the scent of cigars, and the tension is as tangible as the smoke curling toward the ceiling. The lounge is invitation only, the kind of place where a doorman in a fitted suit opens the door without asking who you are. Because if you weren't meant to be here, you wouldn't have made it this far. The tables are low, the seats deep enough to encourage long conversations, and the lighting soft enough to keep expressions unreadable. Chidi arrives with Femi, but is soon left to his own corner. Across the room, two men are seated in a booth, their heads bent close. They're rivals, though tonight they laugh like old friends. He knows better than to believe it. Deals in places like this are often stitched together with a smile and unstitched just as quickly. One of the older members waves him over. "Sit," the man says, sliding a glass toward him. The drink is untouched. It's just there for appearances. The conversation moves slowly at first, touching on music, on the new minister's latest speech, on the rising price of petrol. Then, like the slow turn of a key, it shifts. A nightclub owner in Victoria Island has been slow in his payments. There's talk of whether to replace him with someone more reliable, or whether a quiet visit might be enough to bring him back into line. Chidi listens, offering only a question here and there, never pushing too hard. His value isn't in telling these men what to do. It's in asking the kind of question that lets them convince themselves of the answer. By the time the discussion ends, the plan is set. No threats, no public humiliation. Just a visit, a reminder, and a small adjustment to the payment schedule. Everyone saves face. He notices, though, that not everyone is pleased. In a far corner, a man stirs his drink without drinking it, his eyes fixed on Chidi for a little too long. Power, Chidi is learning, draws not only allies, but quiet resentment. And in Lagos, resentment has a way of waiting patiently until it can collect its due. When they leave, the night air is cooler, the city still humming below. Femi lights a cigarette and exhales slowly. "You handled that well," he says. "Some people like blood. Some people like money. You have to know which is which before you choose your path." Chidi says nothing. He's already replaying the meeting in his mind, noting who spoke most, who stayed silent, and who kept watching him. Every move here leaves an impression, and impressions in this business can outlast the truth. Rain falls in slow, heavy drops that make the streetlights blur into halos. Lagos smells different in the rain, like wet dust and diesel, with a faint sweetness from flowers somewhere behind high compound walls. Chidi walks beside a uniformed officer down an alley where puddles reflect the dull orange glow of the lamps. The officer's name is Inspector Oho, though Chidi knows better than to say it too loudly. Friends in uniform are not the same as friends in the street. They operate in a separate world of ranks, codes, and paperwork, but the right ones can open or close doors faster than any capo. Chidi learned early that in Lagos, the law is less a wall and more a gate, and the man with the key decides who passes through. Ojo is not in the Black Axe, but he knows its pulse. Years ago, he and Femi had done each other favors during a political season that got messier than planned. Now that relationship extends to Chidi. Their first meeting was over a plate of pepper soup in a small, unmarked restaurant where the windows were covered with lace curtains. Oho had watched Chidi the way a man watches an unfamiliar card player. Curious, a little cautious, but open to the game. Tonight, the officer walks him to the back of a government building where the light is low and the rain masks their words. "There's a checkpoint going up on the wharf road," Oho says. "They say it's for customs, but someone's trying to slow down your people." He doesn't name the Black Axe outright, but they both know who he means. "Move your goods before sunrise. After that, things will get sticky. The warning is worth more than gold." Chidi nods, slipping a small envelope into the officer's coat pocket. The motion is quick, unremarkable, as if he's adjusting the lapel. They part without ceremony. No handshake, no lingering glance. The less there is to remember, the safer it is for them both. In the following hours, Chidi makes the calls that need making. Trucks are rerouted, schedules shifted, and the shipment that could have been delayed is gone long before the checkpoint appears. By morning, the only sign it was ever there is an empty stretch of dock and a few damp tire marks. This is how influence works here. Not in dramatic scenes, but in small, precise moves that keep the machine turning. Chidi doesn't think of Oho as a friend in the way most people use the word. They'll never share family meals or trade stories from their youth. But they both understand the value of keeping each other alive and untroubled. Later, at a quiet table in the bar, Femi grins over his drink. "Uniforms can be more dangerous than gang colors," he says. "The trick is making sure they see you as someone worth keeping around." Chidi says nothing, just lifts his glass slightly in acknowledgement. Outside, The rain begins to ease. The city smells fresher now, like it's been rinsed of the day's noise and dust. But Chidi knows better. Lagos never really washes clean. It just waits for the next move. The Porta de Papa is a restless place, even at night. Cranes move like slow, deliberate insects over stacks of containers, their lights swinging in arcs that cut through the mist. The air is thick with the smell of salt, oil, and rust. This is where Lagos meets the rest of the world, where goods arrive legally, illegally, and in that wide, unspoken space between. Chidi stands on an elevated walkway beside a man named Pascal, one of the Black Axe's most trusted handlers for dockside operations. Pascal has the build of someone used to lifting more than his share. His shirt sleeves rolled high to show forearms laced with old scars. He gestures to the ships lined up against the wharf. "Every container here has a story," he says, his voice low. "Some we tell customs, some we don't." The dock workers move with practiced efficiency, their movements almost like choreography, some deliberate, some casual enough to seem like coincidence. A container is offloaded here, another shuffled there, and somewhere in the shuffle, certain crates are directed toward trucks that don't appear on any manifest. Tonight, Chidi's job is not to touch a single box. His role is to watch the flow, memorize the faces, and note the small details. Who gets waved through without inspection? Who pauses to make a phone call before a container moves? Who shakes hands too quickly for it to be just a greeting? These details matter later, when the same faces reappear in a different part of the city, claiming they had no part in what passed through here. Pascal takes him to a container being pried open in the shadow of a warehouse. Inside, beneath a layer of legitimate goods, are the real prizes, sealed packages bound for addresses Chidi will never see. He doesn't ask what's inside. In Lagos, knowing the wrong thing can be more dangerous than ignorance. They linger just long enough to watch the crates loaded into 2 trucks. One will take the main road out of Apapa, passing through a checkpoint manned by friendly uniforms. The other will take a longer, unmarked route through industrial backroads, where no one asks questions after dark. As the trucks pull away, Pascal lights a cigarette and hands one to Chidi, who declines with a small shake of his head. "Smart," Pascal says, exhaling smoke into the night. "Don't pick up habits you don't need." On the drive back toward the mainland, the city glows in the distance, its lights shimmering over the lagoon. Chidi keeps his eyes on the road ahead, but his mind is on the routes he's just learned. Every street, every back gate, every checkpoint. These are the arteries of the operation, and now he's beginning to map them in his head. By the time they return to the quieter streets, the trucks are already blending into Lagos traffic, their cargo hidden in plain sight. The port will be just as busy tomorrow, the stories inside the containers changing, but the rhythm staying the same. Chidi knows he'll be back here soon, and next time, he'll be expected to do more than watch. Election season in Lagos is unlike anything else. Streets are papered with posters, each one promising change, progress, or continuity, sometimes all at once. The air is heavy with speeches blaring from loudspeakers mounted on vans, processions of supporters waving banners, and the constant jingle of campaign songs that spill from shops and roadside stalls. On the surface, it's democracy in motion. Beneath it, it's a market where influence is bought in envelopes. For Chidi, this season is not about voting. It's about trading in a different kind of currency. He meets Femi in a nondescript office above a printing shop. The hum of the printing machines below covers their conversation. On the desk between them are 2 stacks of thick brown envelopes, each marked with a name. These, Femi says, tapping one stack, are for the campaign coordinators who already understand how we do things. He gestures to the other stack. These are for the ones who need convincing. The work is simple in description, complex in execution. Chidi is to deliver the envelopes personally, never using the same route twice, never arriving at an obvious time. In return, the recipients are expected to ensure their neighborhoods remain orderly on election day, meaning the right voters get to the polling stations without trouble, and the wrong ones are delayed by sudden transport problems or mysteriously closed roads. It's a delicate game. Too much pressure and it draws attention. Too little and promises get forgotten. Chidi approaches each delivery like a conversation rather than a transaction. He asks about family, about business, about anything except politics. Only after the small talk does the envelope change hands, often slipped beneath a folded newspaper or inside a plastic bag that might just as easily contain bread. One afternoon, he meets a coordinator in Ajagunle, a neighborhood where the streets are alive with children playing football in alleys. The man is cautious, glancing over his shoulder before accepting the envelope. They say the other side is offering more, he mutters. Chidi smiles faintly. The other side will forget you after the election, he replies. We won't. Not every delivery is smooth. In Mushin, a local youth leader refuses the envelope outright, saying he's tired of promises. Chidi doesn't push. Instead, he leaves a small token, a prepaid phone with one number stored inside. If you change your mind, he says, you'll know how to reach me. 2 days later, the call comes. By the time the official campaign period is in full swing, Chidi has completed his list. He knows which neighborhoods will be peaceful, which will be rowdy in a controlled way, and which will need extra encouragement closer to the vote. On election day itself, Lagos is tense but largely calm. At the end of it, the candidate backed by the Black Axe's allies wins by a comfortable margin. The next evening, at a small gathering in a hidden lounge, Femi raises a glass in Chidi's direction. Some people think politics is about speeches, he says. It's really about making sure the right people owe you a favor. Chidi doesn't toast back, he just nods. In this city, silence often says more than applause. Sur-l'air changes when trouble is brewing. The music from corner shops grows quieter, eyes linger longer on passing cars, and the air holds a kind of pause, like everyone is waiting for the first note of a song they know by heart. Chidi feels it as soon as he steps out of the car. The neighborhood has been a steady source of revenue and influence for the Black Axe, a place where their presence is accepted as long as disputes stay out of public view. But now, whispers drift through the market stalls. Another group, newer and hungrier, has been making moves here. They aren't as careful about the lines they cross. Chidi meets Femi and 2 other lieutenants in the back room of a tailor's shop. The hum of sewing machines in the front masks their voices. A map of the area is spread across the table, marked with circles and lines that look random to an outsider, but chart the flow of money and loyalty. It's not a war yet, Femi says, leaning over the map. But if they keep pushing, it will be. Chidi studies the markings. The encroachment isn't dramatic. It's a shop here, a minibus route there, but it's steady. In Lagos, steady pressure is often more dangerous than open conflict. It wears you down before you realize you're giving ground. His first step is to walk the streets himself. Alone, without an entourage, he greets shopkeepers by name, asks about their families, buys from stalls he hasn't visited in months. These small gestures matter. They remind people that the Black Axe's presence isn't just about control. It's about protection, about being seen. At a small kiosk selling phone credit, the owner mentions that some young men have been coming around, offering better deals on protection. Chidi doesn't press for details. He simply nods and thanks her. The less she has to say out loud, the safer she'll feel. Back in the tailor's shop, Chidi outlines his plan. It's not about confrontation. It's about presence. Trusted faces will be more visible on the streets. Certain debts will be forgiven early. Certain favors called in quietly. The idea is to remind the neighborhood who has kept it stable all these years without ever turning it into a public show of force. The results come slowly. A week later, the kiosk owner calls to say the young men haven't returned. A bus driver mentions that he hasn't seen the rival group near the main junction in days. Even the market chatter shifts, moving away from uncertainty back to the usual talk of prices and politics. Still, Chidi doesn't relax. He knows these things never end. They just go quiet for a while. As he leaves Surulere one evening, he catches sight of a man leaning against a wall, watching him with the kind of stillness that means the game isn't over. In the car, Femi says, "Sometimes keeping the peace feels just like preparing for the next fight." Chidi glances at the street slipping by, their familiar edges softened by the night. "That's because it is," he replies. "The rules are older than most of the men who follow them. They aren't written down, yet everyone who matters knows them. Chief among them is the code of silence, loyalty that stays louder than truth. In the Black Axe, speaking out of turn isn't just discouraged. It's a betrayal that leaves a stain no apology can wash away. Chidi first hears the code articulated by Oba himself during a late-night meeting in a room lit by a single hanging bulb. "The day your tongue runs faster than your mind," Oba says, "is the day you sign your own notice." The others in the room nod, not because they're hearing it for the first time, but because repetition makes the code part of the air they breathe. It isn't about protecting secrets for secrecy's sake. It's about trust as currency. Deals fall apart when words wander. Connections dry up when too many details spill into the wrong ears. And in Lagos, ears are everywhere. In the market stalls, in the corridors of government buildings, even in the whispers between friends who think they're alone. For Chidi, living the code means more than just keeping quiet. It means speaking with intent. If he says he'll handle something, it's as good as done. If he says nothing, it's because silence is the safer answer. The men around him come to read his pauses as carefully as his words. One evening, Femi brings him to a meeting with a small business owner whose shop sits on a lucrative corner in Festac. The man suspects a former associate of leaking information about his accounts to competitors. He's angry, pacing the small room, demanding retribution. Chidi listens without interrupting. When the man finishes, Chidi simply says, "If he spoke, we'll know, and if we know, he won't speak again." The promise is enough. The pacing stops. The code also governs how disputes are resolved within the organization. When two members clash, it's handled quietly, in rooms where the walls don't echo. No one outside hears about it. That way, the image of unity remains unbroken, even if behind the scenes, tempers flare and compromises are brokered. Chidi has seen what happens when the code is broken. Once, years before his rise, a mid-level operator had shared details of an internal disagreement with a friend outside the network. Within days, the story had traveled, twisted and returned to the ears of people it was never meant for. That man was gone within the week. Not dead, but erased. His phone went unanswered, his name unmentioned. In Lagos, being forgotten can be a harsher punishment than anything else. Over time, Chidi becomes a guardian of the code in his own right. If he hears loose talk, he addresses it quietly, often with nothing more than a look or a single line. That's not for them. His restraint gives the warning more weight than shouting ever could. One night, after a meeting breaks up, Femi walks beside him down a narrow street lined with shuttered shops. "You ever wonder why the code works?" Femi asks. Chidi doesn't hesitate. Because once it breaks, you can't fix it. The street ahead is dark, but Chidi's steps are steady. In a city where the truth can change hands a dozen times before dawn, the ability to keep it locked away is as much a weapon as any blade or bullet. The car is unmarked, its paint a faded gray that blends easily into the Lagos night. Chidi sits in the back, the leather seat worn smooth from years of quiet use. Beside him, Femi scrolls through his phone, the glow briefly illuminating the sharp line of his jaw. The driver says nothing, hands steady on the wheel as they wind through streets where most of the shops have long since shuttered. Night drives like this are rarely announced. They happen when someone needs to be somewhere without being seen, when a conversation can't risk walls with ears. Tonight, the city feels different, quieter than usual, though Chidi knows that quiet in Lagos is often just a curtain pulled over something moving fast beneath. They pass the familiar neon of a late-night buka, the flicker of a petrol station sign, and then turn onto roads Chidi doesn't often travel. Here, the streetlights grow sparse, replaced by the intermittent glow of roadside kiosks selling cigarettes and sachet water. The hum of the engine becomes the loudest sound. The first stop is a block of flats on the mainland. Femi gets out, exchanges a few words with a man in a hooded sweatshirt, then returns without explanation. The car moves on. Chidi doesn't ask. In this work, you learn that some errands are complete the moment you return to the vehicle. Their second destination is farther out, toward the industrial edges of the city. Warehouses rise out of the dark, their outlines softened by the mist drifting in from the lagoon. The driver parks near a gate where two men stand smoking, their faces shadowed under baseball caps. A brief nod passes between them and Femi before the gate swings open just enough to let the car roll inside. Inside the yard, a single floodlight illuminates stacks of crates, each marked with faded shipping numbers. Chidi recognizes the smell before he sees the contents. Diesel, machine oil, the faint tang of salt water still clinging to metal. A small group of men are gathered at one corner, speaking in low tones. When they notice Chidi, they pause, measuring him with their eyes. Femi says his name once, firmly, and the tension eases. The business here is brief. A clipboard changes hands, signatures are scribbled, and two crates are loaded into the back of a different vehicle. Chidi notes the license plate, not because he's told to, but because every detail could matter later. On the drive back, they take an entirely different route, cutting through narrow back roads lined with sleeping houses, crossing bridges where the water below reflects nothing but darkness. Femi finally speaks. "You see why we drive at night? No checkpoints, no curious eyes, just the work." Chidi nods, though he's thinking about more than that. Night drives aren't just about avoiding the police or rivals. They're about the space they create, time to think, to observe, to piece together how all the fragments of this world connect. As the car merges back into the more familiar streets, The first hints of dawn are still hours away. The city is breathing slowly now, but Chidi knows the tempo will rise again soon. By then, whatever was moved tonight will already be somewhere else, hidden in plain sight among the city's countless transactions. Some men in Lagos see power as a show of strength, a raised voice, a heavy hand, a display of force meant to silence the room. Chidi sees it differently. For him, power is a calculation, a series of choices where the goal is not to win every fight, but to choose which fights are worth having. He keeps a mental ledger of risks and rewards. Every meeting, every errand, every conversation adds a new entry. Tonight, he's in the back corner of a dim bar in Yaba, the kind with worn leather chairs and music low enough to make whispers feel private. Across from him sits a mid-level nightclub owner who owes the Black Axe a portion of his recent profits. The man wants an extension, claiming slow business. Chidi listens without interrupting, weighing not just the man's words, but the way his fingers drum against the table. If he grants the extension, the man stays in their debt, but grows comfortable delaying payments. If he pushes for immediate settlement, he risks driving him into the arms of a rival group, offering more lenient terms. Both paths carry cost. The calculus isn't simple. After a pause, Chidi leans forward. 1 week, he says, but next Friday, you don't bring excuses, you bring the money. It's a middle line that lets the man leave feeling he's been given a chance, but with the clear understanding that there won't be another. This is how Chidi operates. He knows that in an organization like the Black Axe, the Consigliere's role isn't about shouting orders, it's about keeping the balance. A single wrong call can ripple outwards, turning a quiet street into a battleground, or pushing a reliable contact into the waiting arms of an enemy. He applies the same thinking to bigger moves. When a politician's aide hints at offering a lucrative port contract in exchange for campaign support, Chidi doesn't answer on the spot. He considers who else has interests in that port, how they'll react to a shift in control, and whether the short-term gain will outweigh the long-term stability. Sometimes the smartest move is to let an opportunity pass if it risks unraveling too many other threads. The younger men in the network sometimes mistake this patience for hesitation. They want quick wins, visible victories. Chidi doesn't bother correcting them. Let them think what they want. By the time they see the outcome, it will be too late for them to undo it. One night, over bottles of Star beer in a roadside joint, Femi tells him, "You play the long game too much. Sometimes you have to make a move just to remind them you can." Chidi smiles faintly. "And sometimes you wait so long they forget to watch for you at all." The bar's light flickers briefly, the generator coughing before catching again. Outside, a Danfo bus rattles past, conductor shouting destinations into the night. Lagos moves quickly, but Chidi knows the real work is often in the moments where you hold still, letting the pieces shift until the board favors you. The lagoon looks calm from a distance, but anyone who has lived long enough in Lagos knows it hides its share of trouble. Tonight, the water glimmers under a thin moon, waves tapping gently against the wooden stilts of shacks that line the shore. Chidi stands with Femi on the weathered deck of a small waterside restaurant, the air rich with the smell of grilled fish and kerosene from nearby lanterns. They're here because a dispute has reached the waterfront, a clash between two groups over the control of a dock used for moving special cargo that never sees a customs officer. The problem isn't just the dock itself, it's what passing control might signal. Letting someone take it without resistance could be read as weakness. Fighting openly could draw too much attention. Inside the restaurant, two delegations wait at opposite tables. One represents the Black Axe's long-held claim to the dock. The other is led by a man called Dare, who arrived in Lagos from Port Harcourt with both ambition and the muscle to back it up. Chidi walks in slowly, his steps unhurried, and takes a seat at a table positioned between the two groups. No greetings, no opening speeches. He simply looks from one side to the other, letting the silence work. In Lagos, a pause can be more dangerous than a shout. Finally, he begins. The water doesn't care who claims it, but the men who use it. They'll choose where it's calmest. It's a simple truth, and it lands the way he intends. Both sides know that constant conflict will drive business elsewhere, to other docks, other waters. The discussion that follows is tense but contained. Dare's men want a cut of the current operations. The Black Axe representatives refuse to split profits. Chidi proposes a rotation instead. Certain nights controlled by one side, certain nights by the other, with agreed limits on what can pass through without questions. At first, both sides resist. The dock is too valuable to share. But Chidi reframes it, not as a loss, but as insurance. You lose some nights, you keep the rest without blood in the water. That's cheaper than the alternative. It takes over an hour, but eventually the agreement is made. No handshakes, just curt nods. The water stays quiet for now. As he leaves the restaurant, Chidi steps onto the deck again. The lagoon reflects the moonlight in fractured lines, shifting with the tide. Femi joins him, leaning on the railing. You ever think about how many of these deals are temporary? He asks. Chidi watches the dark water for a moment before answering. All of them. That's why you make them last just long enough to be worth it. In the distance, a boat engine starts, the sound carrying over the water. Tomorrow, the dock will look the same to anyone passing by. Only the people in that room tonight will know how close it came to becoming another battleground. The first rumor comes as a passing comment in a phone call. Too casual to be urgent, too pointed to ignore. Someone inside the network might be talking to the wrong ears. In Lagos, whispers like that are never harmless. They're sparks drifting toward dry ground. Chidi hears it again 2 days later, this time from a man who has no reason to invent such a thing. The word informant is used carefully, almost reluctantly, but it hangs in the air between them like the smell of smoke. He doesn't move immediately. Acting too fast can make the guilty run and the innocent resentful. Instead, he starts watching patterns. Who lingers after meetings, who makes calls from outside the usual safe zones, who's suddenly flush with cash without a visible reason. One evening, in a backroom lit by the weak glow of a single bulb, Femi drops a folded note on the table. Heard from a friend in the CID, Femi says. They've been asking questions they shouldn't know to ask. Someone's feeding them. The name on the note is a low-level associate Chidi knows only in passing. He doesn't believe in coincidences, but he also doesn't believe in easy answers. Rather than confront the man directly, Chidi sets a small test. A false detail, something plausible but not critical, is given to him in casual conversation. Within 3 days, that exact detail circles back to Chidi from a completely different source. Now he's sure. The question is what to do about it. In the Black Axe, betrayal isn't always met with immediate violence. Sometimes the punishment is designed to make a point, to show others the cost of breaking the code. Chidi chooses a quiet approach. The man is called to a meeting in a warehouse near the port. When he arrives, he's greeted by two enforcers who say nothing, just take back his access keys and escort him outside. By morning, word has spread that he's no longer with us. No one asks for details. They don't need to. Later that night, over a drink in the corner of the lounge, Femi asks, "You think that's the last of it?" Chidi shakes his head. "There's always another one. The trick is catching them before they do real damage." The city outside is alive with its usual chaos. Music spilling from roadside bars, vendors shouting over the hum of traffic. But Chidi feels the shift in the air. Trust, once tested, takes longer to rebuild. He makes a mental note to tighten the circles, keep certain conversations even more contained. Somewhere in the noise, the same question runs through his mind. How many of the faces around him could be wearing masks he hasn't noticed yet? Oil money changes everything. It doesn't just swell bank accounts. It reshapes ambitions, rewrites loyalties, and quickens the pace of the entire city. In Lagos during the 2000s, the oil trade, legal and otherwise, flows like a second tide beneath the surface of daily life. For the Black Axe, it is a tide worth riding. Chidi first hears about the opportunity from Pascal, the port handler. They meet in the shade of a half-finished building overlooking the docks, the air carrying both the scent of cement dust and the briny tang of the lagoon. "There's a man in Wari," Pascal says, "moving product through channels no one else is touching. He needs someone here who can keep things smooth." Product in this case doesn't mean drugs. It means refined petroleum siphoned off before it reaches its intended buyers. In the Niger Delta, theft from pipelines is a dangerous art, requiring both technical skill and political cover. By the time it reaches Lagos, it's less about getting the oil and more about keeping it invisible. Chidi's first move is to map the people involved. There's the supplier in the Delta, the shipping contacts who can move small tankers without raising customs alarms, the warehouse operators who can store it in disguised containers, and the distributors who feed it into the city's endless appetite for fuel. Every link in the chain is another mouth to feed, another hand to keep steady. The first meeting with the Wari supplier takes place in a noisy seafood restaurant near Lekki. The man wears a short-sleeved shirt despite the evening breeze, his arms thick with muscle and old scars. He talks in the rhythm of the Delta, fast, clipped, certain. Chidi listens, asking questions only when necessary, taking mental notes on the man's tells. A pause when discussing routes, a quick glance toward the door when mentioning certain names. The deal is simple in outline, but complex in practice. The supplier moves smaller shipments into Lagos through unofficial channels. The Black Axe guarantees their safe transfer and distribution, and the profits are split according to a formula both sides pretend to believe is fair. Within weeks, the effects are visible. Money comes in faster, larger, and with fewer middlemen to cut into it. But oil money carries its own dangers. It attracts attention from players who might ignore other trades. Politicians with campaign debts to pay suddenly remember your name. Rival crews begin making inquiries about your schedules. Chidi adjusts the network's rhythm. Shipments arrive at irregular intervals, sometimes coming in heavy, sometimes light. Storage is split across multiple sites, each with its own cover business. A car parts shop here, a bottled water distributor there. Even the drivers who move the goods never take the same route twice. One night, after overseeing a particularly delicate transfer, Chidi stands on the balcony of a high-rise overlooking the lagoon. The city glows below him, the movement of traffic resembling the constant flow of oil itself. Restless, unending, and never entirely visible. Femi joins him, leaning on the railing. Oil will make us rich, he says. It will make us noticed, Chidi replies. Rich comes after you learn how to survive noticed. The wind off the water is warm, carrying the faint hum of a generator somewhere in the distance. Chidi knows they've stepped onto a bigger stage now, one where the cost of a mistake is measured in more than just money. The Atlantic has a way of stretching a man's imagination. Standing on the marina, you can watch the ships heading west and think of all the places those containers will end up. Places where Lagos is just a line on a manifest. For Chidi, the horizon has always been a reminder that the Black Axe's reach doesn't have to stop at Nigeria's borders. The oil trade makes the first leap possible. With steady shipments now moving under their protection, the network has leverage to approach partners abroad. Some in Europe, others in West Africa's coastal cities. It begins with quiet introductions at high-end hotels in Victoria Island, where businessmen with foreign passports talk in guarded tones over imported whiskey. One of these meetings brings Chidi face to face with a man from Cotonou named Alain, known for controlling a shipping corridor that stretches from Benin into the French port of Marseille. Alain's suit is crisp, his handshake dry, his French-accented English smooth enough to hide how little he's actually saying. The proposal is simple. In exchange for a percentage, Alain's corridor will handle specific shipments under mixed cargo manifests, blending high-value goods into containers of legitimate freight. Chidi knows better than to agree immediately. He spends weeks having the corridor quietly checked. Routes, port officials, even the trucking companies on the other side. Only when the pieces line up does he give the signal to proceed. The first shipment is a test run. 2 containers, one routed to Spain, the other to Belgium. The goods inside are varied. Some oil byproducts, some items better left undescribed. Chidi stays in Lagos while the cargo moves, his phone never far from his hand. Updates come in coded phrases. The guests have reached their hotel. The weather was clear. One bag was lost but found again. Each message is a breath, held and released. When word arrives that both shipments have cleared without incident, Chidi doesn't celebrate. Success on the first try is expected, not exceptional. The real measure is whether the route holds steady over time. Expanding across the Atlantic isn't just about profit, it's about building insulation. The more places the network operates, the harder it is for any one government or rival group to choke off the flow. But every new territory brings its own rules, its own dangers. In Marseille, competition is fierce among North African crews. In Spain, customs officers have been known to turn on their benefactors when political winds shift. At a late-night strategy session, Femi voices the concern plainly. The farther we stretch, the more ways there are for something to snap. Chidi nods, tracing a finger across the map laid out on the table. That's why you don't pull too hard on any one line. You keep them all loose enough to survive a storm. Outside, the Atlantic lies dark and still, its waves tapping softly against the seawall. Chidi knows that beneath that calm surface, currents are moving, some predictable, some not. It's the same with the network now stretching beyond Lagos. What he can see is only part of the story. Family ties in Lagos can be both an anchor and a chain. For Chidi, they are something he has learned to keep at arm's length, not out of coldness, but because the closer the business comes to home, the harder it is to keep it clean. Yet, no matter how far he moves into the shadows, blood has a way of finding him. It begins with a quiet knock on his apartment door late one night. His younger cousin, Ebuka, stands there looking worn and restless. The boy, hardly a boy anymore, grew up in Surulere, Same streets Chidi once walked. But while Chidi learned patience, Ibuka learned speed, and speed in Lagos often means trouble. Over 2 cups of tea, Ibuka explains. A loan gone wrong, the kind that comes with no paperwork and no mercy. The people he owes are not black acts, but their methods are familiar enough. Threats, visits at odd hours, hints of what might happen to his shop if he doesn't pay. Chidi listens, his expression unreadable. Helping Ibuka outright would be simple, but simplicity has a price. If word spreads that Chidi's family is off limits, it invites opportunists to test how far that protection extends. If he refuses, Ibuka could be swallowed whole by men who see debts as leverage for bigger demands. He takes a middle road. The next evening, he meets the lenders in a small beer parlor off Ojuelegba Road. No introductions are needed. They know who he is. The conversation is polite, even warm on the surface. Chidi acknowledges the debt, offers partial repayment immediately, and negotiates a slow, manageable schedule for the rest. There is no threat in his tone, but the lenders understand the subtext. This matter will be resolved without further visits. Ibuka is grateful, but Chidi is careful not to let him see too much of the machinery that made the deal possible. Pay them, he says simply. And next time, if you must borrow from someone who will still shake your hand when the money's gone. His father hears about the intervention weeks later, bringing it up over a Sunday lunch. There's pride in his voice, but also worry. You walk between 2 fires, son. Family on one side, your other life on the other. One day they'll meet. Chidi doesn't answer directly. Instead, he changes the subject to a new footballer making waves in the local league. But the warning lingers, because it's true. Every time family gets close to the business, it leaves a mark. That night, back in his apartment, Chidi thinks of the ledger he keeps in his head, the one that tracks not money, but favors, obligations, and debts that can't be paid in cash. Family sits in its own column there, separate from the rest, untouchable, but never truly safe. Peace in Lagos is never free. In Chidi's line of work, avoiding bloodshed costs as much as starting a fight, sometimes more. Over the years, he has built a reputation for resolving conflicts without bodies on the ground, but every choice not to escalate leaves behind debts that don't show up in any ledger. It starts small, waiving a late payment to keep a promising contact from sinking, offering a reduced cut to a nightclub owner in exchange for quiet cooperation later. These gestures seem light at the time, but they accumulate, stacking like stones until the weight is impossible to ignore. One afternoon, he sits in a shaded courtyard with a man named Sikiru, an older broker who controls access to certain markets in Lagos Island. The last time they met, Chidi had stepped in to settle a dispute between Sikiru's people and a younger crew itching to prove themselves. No one was hurt, but Chidi had quietly ensured that Sikiru's side kept the better end of the deal. Now, Sikiru leans back in his chair, sipping palm wine. "You kept my boys whole that day," he says, "and I haven't forgotten. But favors, they're like fish. They don't stay fresh forever." Chidi nods slowly. He knows what's coming. Sikiru wants a piece of the next oil shipment moving through the port, a cut that will ripple through the rest of the network's agreements. It's not an unreasonable request, but granting it means adjusting arrangements with at least 3 other players. That kind of reshuffling risks stirring the very conflicts Chidi has worked to avoid. For 2 days, he works the angles. Quiet phone calls, discreet meetings in unmarked cars, subtle changes to delivery schedules. By the end, the deal is structured so that everyone takes a slightly smaller share, but no one loses enough to complain loudly. Sikaru gets his cut, the others accept the adjustment, and the shipment moves without incident. But not every debt can be repaid in profit. Some are about personal loyalty. Weeks later, a different marker comes due when Femi calls in the middle of the night. An old ally of his has been picked up by the police on charges that could lead to a long sentence. The man isn't high-ranking, but he knows enough about certain past operations to be dangerous if he decides cooperation is his way out. Chidi spends the next 48 hours in a delicate dance between official channels and less official ones. Inspector Oho makes a phone call. A file goes missing from a desk. A statement is retracted. By the end of the week, the man walks free, but Chidi knows this favor will circle back to him one day, and probably not at a convenient time. Late at night, alone on his balcony, Chidi thinks about the quiet price of peace. Violence is immediate, brutal, messy, final. Avoiding it is slower, more exhausting, and far more complicated. But in his world, the absence of gunfire is worth almost anything. The trick is surviving long enough to collect on the debts peace leaves behind. Festac Town isn't the kind of place outsiders think of when they picture a standoff. The streets are wide, lined with trees, and the houses carry a quiet pride in their well-kept walls and painted gates. But behind those gates, loyalties shift as easily as the tide, and tonight the district is holding its breath. The tension begins over a transport route, one that cuts through Festac and links the mainland to the port. Control of that route means faster movement of certain shipments and fewer eyes along the way. For months, it has been under the steady watch of Black Axe associates, but a rival crew has decided to test how firm that control really is. Chidi arrives just before sunset. He doesn't come with an army, just 2 trusted men and a car that blends into traffic. The point isn't to make a show. It's to see the situation clearly before deciding how to move. He finds Femi already waiting in a small roadside cafe, the kind with plastic chairs and a TV mounted high in the corner showing a soap opera no one is watching. They've parked 2 vans by the roundabout, Femi says, stirring his tea though he hasn't taken a sip. Not blocking the road, just sitting there. That's the thing about Lagos standoffs. They don't always look like movie scenes. Sometimes they're just a handful of vehicles in the wrong place, driven by men with too much time and not enough patience. The danger is in what could happen if either side moves too quickly. Chidi walks the route on foot, greeting shopkeepers and waving to taxi drivers who recognize him. The vans are still there, their tinted windows hiding whoever sits inside. No one leans out. No one calls to him. But the message is clear. They're watching too. Back at the cafe, he outlines the response. No confrontation tonight. Instead, more eyes will be placed along the route. Men selling newspapers, fixing tires, running food stalls. All of them with phones ready. All of them reporting movement. The idea is to let the rival crew get tired of waiting for something to happen. Over the next week, the vans appear less frequently, then stop showing up altogether. There's no agreement signed, no handshake exchanged, but the message has been returned. This road is spoken for. On the final night of his watch, Chidi stands at the roundabout, the air cooler now that the Harmattan wind has begun to blow. Festac Town looks peaceful again, streetlights casting soft pools of light onto the road. But he knows peace here is like anywhere else in Lagos, temporary, fragile, and always one impatient decision away from shattering. As he heads back toward the cafe, Femi falls into step beside him. "Guess that's settled," Femi says. "For now," Chidi replies. his eyes scanning the quiet street. In this city, for now, is the only kind of victory that lasts. The farther Chidi's reach extends, the more he finds himself mediating disputes that don't begin in Lagos at all. The network's influence abroad isn't as visible as its presence at home, but the connections are real. Pockets of influence in cities where Nigerian communities thrive, each with their own tensions and ambitions. One of those pockets is in Johannesburg, where a group of long-settled Black Axe members controls a steady flow of counterfeit goods into local markets. Recently, a disagreement has broken out between them and a younger Nigerian crew over distribution rights in a busy downtown district. The dispute is messy enough that both sides agree it should be settled by someone. From home, Chidi travels quietly, arriving on a Thursday evening. Johannesburg's air is cooler, drier than Lagos, and the streets carry a different kind of rhythm. Slower, but with undercurrents just as sharp. His first meeting is held in the back of a clothing warehouse, the kind where imported jackets and jeans are stacked in high, leaning towers. The two groups face each other across a row of folding tables. The older crew leans on their established history, claiming they've kept the peace in the district for years. The younger men counter that they've brought in new suppliers, better deals, and deserve a share of the territory. Chidi doesn't rush. He asks each side to lay out their terms while he takes notes, his expression giving nothing away. He knows that in disputes like this, the real negotiation isn't in the words spoken across the table. It's in the glances, the hesitations, the moments when someone talks too quickly or not at all. By the second day, he's met with each faction separately, listening to what they don't say as much as what they do. In the end, the solution he proposes is one neither side had considered: a shared supply chain, with profits divided according to volume moved rather than territory held. It's an arrangement that ties their fortunes together. If one side fails, both lose. At first, there's resistance. Old habits die hard, and pride is a stubborn thing. But Chidi frames it as a safeguard against outside interference. If you're fighting each other, he says, you won't see the people coming from the next street over until they've already taken everything. By Sunday evening, the deal is sealed, not with a contract, but with a shipment moved jointly through the downtown markets. The tension doesn't vanish overnight, but the first step has been taken. Back in Lagos a few days later, Femi meets him at the airport. You go all that way just to teach them to share? He asks, half smiling. Chidi shakes his head. I went to make sure they remember who to call before they forget how to listen. In this line of work, keeping the peace isn't about ending disputes. It's about making sure they pass through your hands before they get out of control. Madrid in autumn carries a different kind of weight. Cooler air, slower days, but the same undercurrent Chidi feels in any city with a port. He's here because one of the network's overseas ventures has gone wrong, and the fallout is making its way back toward Lagos like a wave-building speed. It began as a straightforward arrangement. A contact in Spain, Miguel, was supposed to receive a shipment routed through multiple ports to blur its trail. In theory, it was clean. Official paperwork, quiet handling, no unnecessary attention. But somewhere along the line, the shipment drew the interest of customs officials who weren't on the payroll. When Chidi lands, the city feels muted compared to Lagos. Wide boulevards, muted voices, cafes with outdoor heaters. Miguel meets him in a small tapas bar off a narrow street, his eyes darting more than usual. They've opened 2 of the containers, Miguel says. One was clean, the other... He doesn't finish the sentence. He doesn't have to. The cargo wasn't supposed to be unpacked here. Even a partial inspection can unravel an operation if the wrong people start asking the right questions. Chidi listens, sipping black coffee instead of wine, his mind already sorting through the possible points of failure. Was it the route, the paperwork, or someone inside who spoke? Over the next 2 days, he meets quietly with intermediaries, dock supervisors, shipping clerks, a lawyer who owes the network more than one favor. The story is consistent. The inspection wasn't random. Someone tipped them off. The damage is partly contained. The clean container moves forward without issue. The compromised one is seized, but not yet linked directly to anyone in Lagos. Still, the loss stings. Not just in money, but in the signal it sends, that even well-laid routes can be touched. On his final night in Madrid, Chidi meets Miguel again, this time in the shadow of a closed market. "We can rebuild the route," Miguel says, "but it will take time." Chidi nods. "Time is fine. Just make sure the next route is yours from end to end. No borrowed hands." When he returns to Lagos, Femi listens to the report in silence. "So it wasn't the cargo that failed," he says finally. "No," Chidi replies. "It was the people." The Madrid misstep becomes another lesson in the growing list Chidi carries. Proof that distance doesn't protect you from the weaknesses in your own chain, and that every city, no matter how far from home, can still pull you into its own kind of trouble. Lagos Marina at night has a strange kind of quiet, broken only by the slap of water against the pilings and the low murmur of voices from the moored boats. Chidi stands at the edge of the dock, hands in his pockets, watching the reflection of the city lights ripple across the lagoon. He's here for a meeting no one will ever admit took place. A conversation that can't be spoken in public, yet will shape the months ahead. The other man arrives without ceremony. He's not Black Axe, but he's close enough to the center of things to matter. His crew controls certain supply routes through the mainland markets, and lately, those routes have been drifting toward a collision with the network's oil distribution lines. In Lagos, you can either meet that kind of overlap head-on or settle it quietly. Tonight is about the quiet way. They sit on opposite ends of a weathered bench under the dim light of a pier lamp. For a long while, the only sound is the water and the occasional creak of wood. Chidi breaks the silence first. "We can both keep what we have, but if we keep stepping into each other's paths, someone else will take both." The man chuckles, low and without humor. "You're offering me peace? I'm offering you time," Chidi says evenly. "Time to work without looking over your shoulder. But it comes with boundaries. The boundaries are simple. Fixed markets for each side, shared intelligence on potential police interest, and a standing agreement that, if a shipment is compromised, the other side doesn't move in to exploit the gap. It's not generosity. It's self-preservation, disguised as cooperation." The man thinks it over, his gaze on the dark water. "And if I say no?" Chidi doesn't look at him. "Then the next conversation we have won't be on a bench." They leave it at that. No handshake, no paper, just a mutual understanding that sometimes the smallest agreements prevent the largest problems. Later, walking back toward the city streets, Chidi reflects on how many of his most important deals have been made in places like this, unguarded, without the weight of an entourage, just two men testing how far they can trust the other. By the time he reaches the car, the marina behind him is silent again. The city's noise rushes back in, a reminder that the peace he's just arranged will last only as long as both sides remember why they agreed to it in the first place. The marina always smells of salt and diesel, but tonight there's something heavier in the air. Finality. Chidi stands by the railing of a private dock, the low hum of generators filling the gaps between the slap of water against the hulls. This is where the last counsel will be given, though neither side says it aloud. The meeting is with Oba, the man whose word once set the tempo for Chidi's rise. Age has sharpened Oba's eyes, even as it slowed his movements. He sits at a small table beneath a canvas awning, a half-empty bottle of cognac between two glasses. Chidi takes the seat opposite him without waiting to be invited. For a while, they speak of nothing important. Football results, the weather turning dry, the port's latest delays. But the pauses between topics stretch longer, and finally, Oba leans forward, resting both hands on the table. "You've done well," he says. "Better than most I've trusted. But this game..." He gestures vaguely toward the city beyond the marina lights. "It doesn't end. You can step aside, or it will drag you under." Chidi doesn't argue. He's seen enough to know the truth in those words. The last few years have been a careful balance of deals, alliances, and calculated retreats. Lately, the retreats have been growing in number. The younger men are more impatient, the rivals bolder, and the city less forgiving of mistakes. Oba pours them both a drink. "One last thing," he says, sliding a folded piece of paper across the table. It's a list of names. Some allies, some problems, all of them tied to matters that will need watching once Chidi is no longer at the table. "Give this to who you think should have it, not before you leave." After, they drink in silence, the air thick with unspoken acknowledgments. This isn't exile. It's a passing of weight from one set of shoulders to another. When Chidi rises to leave, Oba doesn't stand. He simply nods once, the way he did the first time they met years ago. That small gesture had been the opening to everything. Tonight, it's the closing. Walking back down the dock, Chidi hears the soft lapping of the tide and the distant hum of the city. Each step feels lighter, though he knows the lightness is temporary. In Lagos, even stepping away is another move in the game. You just stop playing on the same board. By the time he reaches the street, the marina is already shrinking behind him, the glow of its lamps swallowed by the night. Lagos has always been a city that swallows stories whole, leaving behind only whispers. Chidi knows this better than most. Weeks after that last meeting at the marina, his name still moves quietly through certain rooms, though he's no longer there to hear it. He steps back without fanfare. No announcement, no final display. One day he's at the center of the table, guiding the flow of money and influence. The next, he's just another face in the crowd, walking the same streets he once shaped from the shadows. The shift is deliberate, disappearing slowly enough that no one thinks to ask where he's gone until he's already gone. It isn't retirement in the ordinary sense. The phone still rings, though less often. Favors still come due, and from time to time, he answers them. Not for the black axe directly, but for individuals whose loyalty was earned long ago. He has no illusions about the permanence of this distance. In Lagos, every exit is temporary unless you burn every bridge behind you, and Chidi has chosen to leave most of his standing. His days become simpler. Morning coffee on a balcony that overlooks the hum of the city. Short walks to familiar shops where no one asks more than necessary. Evenings spent in small bars where the music is low and the company doesn't pry, yet the old instincts never leave. A certain car parked too long on his street still makes him take a longer route home. A stranger watching him in a market still makes him shift position to keep the exit in view. One evening, passing through Surulere, He stops at the roundabout where years earlier he'd stared down rival vans. The street is calm now, the vendors busy with their trade, the bus drivers shouting destinations into the warm air. No one here knows what this place once meant to him, and that's exactly how he prefers it. Chidi fades into the crowd, his pace unhurried, his gaze steady. Somewhere behind him, the city keeps spinning its endless web of deals, debts, and quiet wars. He's no longer holding the threads, but part of him knows he could find them again if he chose to. For now, though, Lagos moves on, and so does he. So, as the streets settle under the soft weight of night, let the noise fade into something gentler. Picture the lagoon at low tide, its surface smoothing under the moon, the city's glow spilling quietly across the water. Imagine the hum of a distant generator blending with the rustle of leaves along a quiet road, the rhythm steady, unhurried. Breathe with it, slow even, without the urgency that fills the daytime hours. Let the faces and names drift further into the background, their edges blurring until they're no more than outlines against the warm dark. The markets are closed now, the gates drawn shut, and even the busiest corners have surrendered to the calm. Here, in this softened version of Lagos, the rules and rivalries no longer matter. There is only the faint breeze off the water, the dim scatter of streetlights, and the steady comfort of being unseen. Let that stillness hold you, the way the tide holds the shore, steady and certain until morning comes.